Good evening, everyone. I'm calling to order the Board of Selectmen meeting for the town of Hingham, dated June 19th, 2018. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes dated June 5, 2018. Accept the motion to approve the minutes of January 5, 2018.
So moved.
Second?
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Public comment? Hearing none, we'll get right to it. Public hearing on the request of National Grid to install and maintain approximately 440 feet of 2-inch gas main on Pond Street. Do we have someone here for that? Greetings, lady and gentlemen. All right.
So just, do you mind if I jump in real quick?
Fire away.
Just want to introduce Tom Molinari to anyone on the board who hasn't yet met Tom. This might be your first presentation at the board, is it? Or close to it. Anyway, Tom works in the engineering office.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I did notice that you didn't look like Harry, so.
And we're not saying whether that's a compliment.
So what do we have?
So this is to install 440 feet of 2-inch plastic from the new, installing 6-inch plastic on Main Street to Pleasant Street to replace a 1-inch VSTL insert.
So the length of the street, basically?
Correct, that's correct.
Okay. My colleagues have any questions?
Will the sidewalks be involved in this at all, or is it just the street?
No, it's just the street.
And did you anticipate this as part of the project, or did this sort of come up as you were digging?
I believe that it just came up because they thought it was 2-inch plastic, but it was really just an insert.
So it gives you an opportunity to replace it. Can I ask an off-topic question? I'm just wondering how the Main Street project's going, if you have any sense of that, or?
Yeah, it's, so far so good. The main is completed, and now they're doing services now, so
Oh, wow,
we've been doing
okay.
that for
See that? Yeah.
a week or two at this point, and everything goes well, hopefully by the end of July, mid to end July.
Great. Great. No unpleasant surprises?
A
No ledge?
little bit of ledge.
Where?
Just a little bit. Where was it? Right around Jackass Park. So, but they got through it, and it's all done now,
I'd
as far as we know.
I'd thank you for being responsive. We've gotten some calls from some residents. There were a few homes where vehicles were being staged, so the potential disruption to them was longer than a couple of days. And we appreciate your working with us to figure out a solution that was, not too intrusive on anyone stretch of that road.
Tom, question on the age of the street. Is Pond Street on the paving schedule anytime soon?
It was last paved in '96. It's not on our schedule at the moment, but, we'll obviously look into that.
It sees a fair amount of traffic with the funeral home there and GAR, so we wanted to
Right.
stand up to that. Questions from the audience, anybody? Okay. Take a motion. Unless my colleagues have any other questions.
I move that we approve the request of National Grid to install and maintain approximately 440 feet of 2-inch gas main in Pond Street. This gas main will originate from the existing 6-inch main in Main Street and continue under the paved surface of Pond Street southerly to the completion of at the existing 2-inch main in Pleasant Street. This gas main will replace an existing 1-inch inserted bare steel decayed main that is approximately 30 years old. This approval is subject to the stipulation of the Department of Public Works as outlined in the letter dated June 1, 2018.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Thanks so much.
Hey,
Best of luck.
thanks for coming in.
Next item on the agenda is water main replacement, Arnold Road at Main Street. You see the water company's here. Evening, Mr. Wilson.
Good evening.
How are you tonight?
Very good, thank you.
Tell us a little bit about what you plan to do at the intersection of Arnold Road.
Sure. We're trying to coordinate with the DPW and the gas main project we just heard about. Arnold Road is on our list of water mains to be replaced. However, we don't have a specific year. Actually, we're tentatively 2021. So it's our understanding that Main Street's going to be repaved on both ends of Arnold Road. So we want to get out of the road. So the plan is to tie into the main on Main Street and bring it onto the road about 50 to 65 feet on each side, and then tie it in with the existing main. Then sometime in the future, when we have to replace the main on Arnold Road, we won't have to get into Main Street and deal with the pavement moratorium.
I noticed, over the course of the last several years, this seems to be a problem main, or we're always seeing, well, I shouldn't say we're always, but we've frequently seen email notifications that this particular main is leaking or being repaired. Is there an age on this?
There is an age on it. I don't have that written down, didn't bring it with me.
Okay. Is it an old main or a new main?
It's fairly old. It's a 2-inch main, so most 2-inch mains are fairly old.
And so you're going to put an 8-inch one in
Yes.
its place? Okay.
Tentatively scheduled for 2021.
Okay. So does this mean then that you're going to stub it to the existing line, and then at some point in the future replace the line overall on Arnold Road, or?
That's exactly correct.
Okay, all right. So is it going in 115 feet as to both ends of the roadway, or a total of 115 feet?
The northern end, 65 feet approximately, and the southern end, 50 feet approximately. So 115 feet total.
And will the roadway be closed off during this time?
The DPW has requested we do the tie-ins on Main Street in the evenings, so night work.
Okay.
And then during the day, once we're off Main Street, there'll always be a travel lane available, and residents will be allowed always access to their driveways.
Okay. My colleagues have any questions?
Are we losing any efficiencies by not just replacing the main? Well, in other words, will this entire project, when it's completed, cost more because it's being done in two pieces?
No, I don't think so.
As a point of clarification and understanding, where is the main in Arnold Road then?
The existing main?
Yes.
Within Arnold Road. I'm not sure if you have a set of plans there. It looks like you do. So
It's a schematic showing both ends of the street.
yeah. So we're just showing the area of work where we'll be working. So basically, it looks like the main is within one travel lane of Arnold Road. Paper south.
Okay.
And how long do you think the project will take?
Construction activities, excavation, probably a week, and then there'll be a week of testing. Testing is pressure testing, disinfection, and then testing to make sure it's bacteriologically safe.
And you said since you're coordinating with the Main Street project, I'm assuming that work would take place fairly soon?
Yes, that's the intent.
Okay. And interruption to service at some point?
During the tie-in to Arnold Road, there will be a brief interruption of service, yes.
Okay.
While we have you here, I received some input from some of the citizens as to the coloration and the taste of the water. Can you speak generally as to what's going on with the water system that would cause that to be occurring? I know your company put something out, but
Yeah.
you're here, so.
Yeah, we sent you an email yesterday, and I think a follow-up email this morning. We've had some episode of discoloration, predominantly this past weekend due to high flows. It looks like with a warm weekend, and I think it originated along the parade route. Everyone wants a nice green lawn for the parade, and there was a lot of water usage, and it created a high velocity and stirred up some sediments. Interestingly enough, that section of town we flushed this past spring in April and May, but it looks like on the larger mains, it's hard to create the scouring velocity needed to remove all the sediments. Sometimes flushing programs take a few years to remove all the sediments. So we made a lot of progress in 2017. We made some good progress in this past spring, but, based on the size of the mains, looks like we need to keep flushing, and that's the plan, to continue flushing. The good news, it was isolated to, the central Hingham area. There were no issues in South Hingham, so it looks like it was a localized issue because of a lot of water usage.
In 2000, Steve, from sort of 2017 and up through this part of 2018, what percentage of the entire system has been flushed? I mean, I know we've gotten periodic things about different sections, but over the last 18 months, what percentage of the system would you say has been flushed?
2017, 100% of the system. In 2018, we flushed 1/3 of the entire system. In the fall, we'll flush another third. So the plan is to flush 2/3 of the system every year, so that, every year and a half, we're flushing 100% of the system.
And prior to 2017, when was the last time the system was entirely flushed?
I don't have that information. I've only been the director of operations for it'll be 2 years in July.
Is this something that has to be done on a regular basis in order for the pipes to stay free of
It's
debris?
recommended, yes. Yep. And that's why we're doing it.
Do you pressurize the system when you do that in a different way than the water ordinarily flows? I don't quite understand what flushing.
So we're opening fire hydrants in a sequential pattern to create a high velocity in the pipes that will stir up any sediment that's settled in the pipes. And the objective is to keep the hydrant open while the sediment moves out of the hydrant.
Runs
When
clear.
it clears up, then slowly close down the hydrant. And then go to the next area. And you always want to progress in a stepwise fashion. So you start at the beginning and work your way down. You don't want to start in the middle and work out, because you want to be pulling clean water where you've just been to the next area. And so we have a flushing program that breaks up the system in zones, 3 main zones, and within each zone, flushing routes. Within each route, anywhere from 10 to 14 hydrants per evening. And basically, you just progress along.
And that's in all of Service Area A, so it includes Hull?
Yes.
Because I have some friends in Hull who have experienced discolored water in the last few days as well.
Oh, okay.
So,
Likely the water that's stirred up in central Hingham made its way down to Hull.
I guess the question I would have is just, I know that there's, a lot of peak usage and it was really warm, but, I've lived in Hingham for 17 years, and every June it gets really hot and people use a lot of water. And it's only been in the last couple of years that I can recall that there's been incidences of discolored water, and yet, as I said, it gets warm every June, people are watering, so, I'm kind of curious at what's different in the last couple years that would cause this degree of discoloration to happen.
It sounds like it was an accumulation of sediment. So again, 2017, we flushed the system. We flushed it this spring, central Hingham area, and we need to continue to do that.
When you say accumulation of sediment, are you talking
Yeah.
about the material that forms the pipes, or something that's
Naturally-
infiltrating the pipes?
Naturally occurring minerals in the water that accumulate over time and can precipitate and settle on the bottom of the pipes when there's low flows, in the winter.
I guess I would just say in closing, again, just while you're here, and thank you for listening, is that I think the residents in this community have an expectation that their water is not discolored any time of the year, especially given how much, especially given our water rates. And I think that while we all understand that we're entering the time of peak water usage, I would just say that when I'm talking to people, that's not an acceptable excuse to them. They expect, they expect it to be, clear all the time. And so, so thank you for, for listening to that. We sometimes get feedback. We got a letter, I got a few phone calls.
Yep.
And we felt it's important to convey that while you're here.
Yeah, we did some target flushing this week. We've done some supplemental sampling to identify where it's originated from, and Going to do some target flushing tomorrow night, and we don't expect it to happen again. We feel we've done a good job flushing, so we want to, hopefully that was it for the season.
Do you measure the sediment that's flushed out to make an assessment as to whether or not the pipe should be replaced?
No, that's not typically something you do for pipe replacement. We'll basically, we measure the volume and the velocity coming out, but not sediment. I mean, it's actually good to see discolored water coming out of the hydrant. That means you're getting rid of it. It's not going to be there for customers to get stirred up and have customer issues.
Do you make a decision to replace pipes based on the fact that they're leaking and no other reason?
Well, pipe replacement decisions multifaceted. Break history, age, size, fire flow availability. Instances where coordinating with paving programs, so there's all kinds of reasons to replace a water main.
Is there a policy in place to replace the pipes when the road's being resurfaced so we don't have to open them up?
We, as long as I've been here, and I think a year before, we've been meeting with the DPW every, I think it's late fall or winter, to coordinate our replacement programs with the paving programs, to make sure that we get ahead and we don't.
How's that going? From your perspective?
Very good. We have not been able to keep up with the number of mains that have been done. We've asked, I think, on 2 occasions to forego for a year some mains, but we've basically done a lot of mains. More than half of our projects have been because of paving projects.
I would just jump in. I've been looking at some data recently, and I believe from 2013 to 2017, 24 streets in Hingham that fell under the 5-year moratorium have had to be opened for emergency water repairs, including 3 times opening Arnold Road that was paved 2 years ago. And I think we got a notice a couple weeks ago about Downer Ave that was paved. So I would just say that from our perspective, when we have an emergency water repair in a road that's under the 5-year moratorium, that isn't working as well with us. You understand all the issues with the road. So I think we have an opportunity to do a better job with some of the coordination. Andrews Isle being opened 3 times since it was repaved, I don't get it.
Yeah, I've worked with a lot of water systems, a lot of different municipalities, and sometimes water main breaks are unpredictable. It's not due to age. It can be settlement from the bedding material that no one was around to see. So we don't. I know in some towns the joke is, well, now we know where the next main's going to break because it's the road you just paved. So we have no intent of having a main break on a newly paved road. That's the last thing we want.
What's the age of the pipe in Andrews Isle?
I don't know off the top of my head. Didn't know I was going to be asked that question tonight.
Right. I'm just kind of responding to the conversation, that's all.
Would you take a motion?
I will.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll make a motion to approve the request to install and maintain 2 new 8-inch diameter ductile iron water main stubs, approximately 115 feet, at both ends of Arnold Road at the intersection of Main Street. The new water main stubs will originate at both intersections of Arnold Road and Main Street, connecting into the existing 20-inch main and continuing under the paved surface of Main Street to completion, just within the layout of Arnold Road, to be used for a future water replacement project on Arnold Road. This work is being proposed before this section of Main Street is paved. This approval is subject to stipulation of the Department of Public Works as outlined in the letter dated May 4th, 2018.
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you for your
Thank you
time.
so much. Appreciate the
Good
information.
evening.
You too. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Are we going to see you going forward, or are you just cameo?
See, I don't know.
All right. Next item on the agenda. Very fun transfer. Here we go.
Hi, Sue.
Good evening.
How are you tonight?
I'm fine, how about yourself?
Good.
You're looking for some money, Sue, huh?
I always am, I'm sorry. This is our yearly meeting for year-end transfers reserve fund transfers, interdepartment transfers, intra-department transfers, and something we haven't seen in a little bit, repurposing of capital outlay. The cover sheet you have, the first third of it is the FY18 appropriation of $550. Article 12 of Town Meeting 2018, adding $884,146. The rest are the reserve fund transfers that have already been approved so far. And the middle part is the pending reserve fund transfers for tonight. The first reserve fund transfer we have is snow and ice for the amount of $490,196. The town's supply of salt and sand were depleted and had to be replenished. Late winter storms and freeze-overs also contributed to the deficit. I have Randy Sylvester here if you have any questions.
I would just note for the record and the audience, because, you know, you see a transfer of this amount and, you know, it gets your attention, it's almost $500,000. We have been budgeting well below the 5- and 10-year average for snow and ice. We budget $550,000. In some years, it's as much as $2 million. It's usually over $1 million. So this, to me, is reflective of the fact that we have a little bit of a structural deficit in this part of our budget. And, you know, I know every year we all want to fund new things, and we say, well, we've got to increase the snow and ice budget. When I start looking at a deficit that is almost equal to the amount budgeted, it says to me that we got to start chipping away at this in the budget process, because we're kidding ourselves if we think that the snow and ice is going to stay, you know, at $500,000 a year.
Well, and I think Randy, in the past, he's responded to questions from us on the purchasing of sand and salt, which I think he does very strategically, but I feel like this winter with those late storms makes it impossible to you know, follow that purchasing pattern. So the stuff that he bought early in the year, you know, I think he was doing his best to use the dollars as wisely as he could, but, you know, every time the temperature would drop and it would snow like late this spring, I'm like, oh, no. I'm sure I wasn't the only one doing that. So I appreciate the thought that Randy puts into managing that budget, and, you know, there's some of this stuff that we can't control. But nonetheless, we need to, number one, respond to efficiently and effectively for the town, and then number two, we've got to have enough money to pay for it, so.
I don't have much to add. When it snows, you got to clear the streets, and I can't predict when it's going to snow. And we've had this conversation now. We've had this conversation.
I think it's a yearly conversation.
Yeah, it is.
It's always nice to have it with you, though, Sam.
We keep saying we're going to address it. All right,
Would you like a motion?
please.
I'll make a motion to recommend a transfer from the reserve fund to the DPW snow removal account in the amount of $490,196.
One second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Second one, the amount requested for legal services is $449,000. This expenditure was higher than anticipated for legal review for litigation, land use, labor, and general counsel.
So the breakdown.
Mr. Mayo's here for those questions.
The breakdown of this request is by category. We have $232,010 in litigation, $207,042 in land use, legal help, $92,805 in labor, and $69,232 in general counsel.
Questions from my colleagues?
I just, again, point out that one of the big expenses that we have is that every year when we have a rate case with Aquarion Water, the town litigates against that, and typically a rate case costs anywhere between, you know, $55,000 and about $75,000. This year, Aquarion filed a rate case and then 6 months later amended it, changed it, so we're essentially, the litigation expenses are, you know, pretty much doubling. And while we share those costs with Hull, Right now, we've got $70,000 sunk into the rate case. And, you know, by the way, if we don't show up and try to challenge a rate case, the DPU will award the increase, which is about, the amount being requested is about $1.6 million. So that's a biggie. I would also just note, and Tom, thank you for the summary, that the town has spent just under $40,000 on legal expenses associated with Riverstone. And obviously, that's really important work. That's a neighborhood that's being dramatically affected. Susan Murphy's done outstanding work, and, you know, as people say, what does the town do to help with matters like this? Part of this board's job is that we provide the resources in the form of money for legal expenses, and I think Susan's work's been excellent in trying to mitigate the impact of that project as much as we can within the law.
Well, and I know that the town administrator's office takes care in managing the budget and also managing access to legal counsel. I think one of the new things that's been, you know, hopefully anticipates and heads off cost is the proactive involvement of the general counsel with staff under the direction of Tom Mayo. And, you know, you also have to look at this. We're a $100 million plus operation, and we're a highly regulated entity with significant numbers of personnel and capital. And, you know, all that boils down to, you know, I think the need for qualified legal services. I will say that we, you know, I think the model that we're using now, where we have experts in particular fields that manage particular aspects of the town's legal business, I think is working efficiently. I think the three of us try very hard to be efficient with our time with legal counsel, and, you know, I also think that the 3 or 4 folks that we have that work for the town work really hard for the town, and I frankly think that we see a benefit far in excess of what you see on the page.
I concur with the comments that both Mary and Karen have made. And I think, you know, ladies and gentlemen, the men and women we hire to represent us are extraordinarily sensitive that it's public money that's being spent. And I'd have to say, to their credit, you know, they're pretty good at billing very conservatively. It's a cost of doing business, and I think we're managing it very well. So unless anybody's got any questions, I'd like to take a motion on that.
I move that we recommend a transfer from the reserve fund to the Selectmen Legal Services account in the amount of $449,000.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next,
The next one is employees' Medicare taxes, a reserve fund transfer for $65,000. The new employees are replacing retired employees who did not have to pay into Medicare tax. This is a direct link to salaries. The budget amount is not updated through the budget process and should be. At the very end, when we do the budget, especially with the education budget, we should actually look at it and add a little bit when the budget process is done.
Well, and it's a little trickier to forecast that as well, because the education budget and 80% of its personnel is a lump sum.
Mm-hmm.
And to the extent that there are savings in the education budget, oftentimes additional people are hired, and
Exactly.
it triggers this expense after the budget's been settled.
Okay, that's helpful to me, because I did have a question about, you know, is it possible to monitor this in a sort of more efficient way so that we're not ending up with a reserve fund transfer? And it sounds like a piece of this we really can't, but maybe some of it we can.
We're getting a little bit better. It's going down every year.
Okay, all right.
We're getting there, Ken.
I think what Sue is suggesting is that, you know, what we could do perhaps is, you know, halfway through the fiscal year, kind of see how we're trending.
Yeah.
You know, we still may have the same expense at the end of the year, but we would know it's coming, and we would have more of a window to, you know, to manage it.
Because sometimes, and maybe not, this isn't the line item that we do that with, but sometimes when we see those trends, we might, you know, department heads may make some adjustments within their own budget to be able to absorb costs. Maybe this isn't one of those costs, but I like the idea that, you know, we have a line of sight to what we think our liabilities are going to be before tonight.
Mm-hmm.
motion?
Make a motion to recommend a transfer from the reserve fund to the mandatory Medicare taxes account in the amount of $65,000.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And the next one is, actually been here yearly, workers' comp in the amount of $50,000. We have had one workers' comp case settled this year. We still have 2 long-term cases we are trying to settle. And we've had a few incidences of workers' comp this year, so it went over by 50 grand.
What's the total of this line item, Sue?
We actually bumped it up.
That's what I thought.
To 19.
Yeah.
It was 330,000 for FY '18.
Okay.
And this account it's self-insured, so.
Right, right. And in terms of those costs, do we periodically assess whether we're, let me ask it another way, are most municipalities self-insured for workers' compensation?
No, I wouldn't say most are.
So I'm just wondering, is it, like, if the trend again is escalating, is it worth thinking about actually insuring?
I know Ted looked into it several years ago, and
Might be worth doing again.
I mean, at some point, there's always that tipping point of,
That's right.
you don't want to pay too much in premiums that you're not going to pay out the door. On the other hand, if our workforce is changing and we're having these issues, I don't know, is it worth having the conversation again?
Yeah.
We can look.
It's one of those things that we should look at periodically.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt to do it again, for sure. Yeah.
Do we have a third-party administrator?
yes, we do.
Motion?
I recommend a transfer from the reserve fund to the workers' compensation account in the amount of $50,000.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the next one, I'm going to invite Bill Friend and let Steve Dempsey this time.
Bill? Steve, see what he wants to be.
Welcome.
Hi, hello, how are you?
No, Steve, Steve.
That's all right. We
Steve
don't need
Dempsey.
I don't know.
Okay. The amount is for $50,000 for the South Shore Country Club restaurant sewer. An inspection of the septic tanks at the country club was found that the leaching field has failed, and the 2 tanks are now tight tanks. They need to be pumped out twice a week. The breakdown is estimated $9,000 for planning, $9,000 for a grinder pump, $7,000 for a manhole, and $25,000 for construction.
And what will the construction do there? Will it tie into the sewer?
Yes.
That's what the construction is? Okay.
Yeah, we basically found a cesspool there that's failed, in essence. The leaching field has failed, the cesspool has failed. It needs to be pumped twice a week at this point. It's a busy time of year for them, so it's very difficult. But we're making through. What we're looking to do is connect this to the existing sewer that's on site further down in the parking lot, so bringing it around the restaurant and then down to the parking lot. There is a possibility that when we open up the parking lot, we could find ledge, and at that point, costs could escalate. But for right now, we don't know if that will be the case or not, so this is an estimate that we think we can do this within.
And how quickly would you undertake that work?
Well, if this is approved tonight, I'm asking that the planning stage be undertaken by the engineering firm tomorrow.
Okay.
Because every week we go, it's $350.
Yeah.
So,
700, 350 twice,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. And will this cost, as I just think about the books closing and things like that, will this be a cost that the town will incur? Or is there a possibility that country club revenues at the end of the year would, be able to cover it? Is that being contemplated?
Yeah, it's a great question. We will use country club revenues to their full extent possible. This is to cover in case they're either come in flat or can't cover all of it.
Sure.
This is to cover the difference.
And I realize this is a lot of money. It's coming in unexpectedly at the end of the year, so
It's also got to get done.
it's
like
got to
you
get
said.
done, absolutely.
I think, though, if it goes over this amount, we need the sewer in to get a better understanding of what's involved.
Yeah,
Good. Motion?
Make a motion to recommend a transfer from the reserve fund to the South Shore Country Club restaurant sewer account in the amount of $50,000.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill Friend, you didn't bring us any of your birthday cake.
Yeah, little
I
bird
was
told us it
waiting.
was your birthday.
I have it in the car, actually.
No.
Well, hey, we're here all night, so.
All right.
Billy, he's gonna
Happy
kill me,
birthday.
but you share a birthday with my oldest child.
Thank you, thanks.
Happy birthday.
Right now, I'd like to ask the chief and
Police.
deputy chief of police, come up. The first reserve fund transfer is for $30,000 for police salary overtime. The recent contract settlement was not funded in FY18. The fitness program night differential amounted to $42,000. 2 employees retired, and the collective sick leave buyback amounted to $10,000. During FY18, we also experienced high numbers in Family Medical Leave Act, administrative leave, and on-job injuries. The additional security required at public events increased unfunded training mandates and time required for training, data transfers for new computer-aided dispatch and records management system. These all required increased overtime cost. Previous years, we have been averaging $70,000 in overtime deficits. We expect overtime costs will be in a deficit of $180,000. In previous years, unused salary line items were able to cover the deficit. Even with reduction in community programs and careful management of expenses, we were not able to stay within the overall salary budget.
So a lot of numbers in here.
Yep,
I
there are,
just-
yes,
so-
yeah.
So the request is for $30,000 because while your overtime, while there's a $180,000 overtime deficit, you're covering $150,000 of that in other ways?
Yes, where there's some unused salary money that
Yep.
we've always been able to use, and we're continuing to use that. It's just that this has just gone beyond what we normally can absorb.
And I would imagine that because you have some of those, you had some open positions, that's one of the reasons why you've got some of that overtime.
Yes,
So
yeah.
it's, yeah. I had a suggestion to Tom, Karen, and Paul that over the course of the summer, I think it would be worthwhile to just kind of look at the municipal overtime and just understand whether there are any policy decisions that need to get made, any kind of operational decisions, or any budgeting decisions, or a combination of both. You know, Glenn, I know that, you know, you get a lot of requests and you know, for example, we've asked this year that there be public safety presence in this building when we're having public meetings. We understand that that's a cost. I know that you also get a lot of requests from community organizations, and you guys are wonderful about doing all that, but I understand you're getting a lot of demands on your time. I'd like to, over the summer, kind of leading into the budget, take a look at some of that, so that as we go into the budget season, you know, again, you may want to make some policy changes, or it may have some budget implications. Because, you know, again, when I see a deficit of this much, it sort of says to me that we want to, you know, maybe dig into it a little bit, so that, as well, that, you know, for this coming fiscal year, you understand kind of what you're up against.
Yes, yeah.
And we do
yeah.
that early on in the fiscal year, so that if adjustments need to get made, and I'm not suggesting we reduce the amount of public safety we have, but I think it just might help us all to understand it a little better.
No, I think that makes sense, and that's why, you know, I had to actually, you know, a couple of things that were dear to our heart this year is I had to sort of, unfortunately, say I just couldn't do it this year, like such as Family Fun Day, and we're reducing the amount of citizens police academies we're doing, because all these take up time and energy and divert it away from the shifts. And I think we have an aging group of superior officers, rated officers, and we ran into a lot of medical leave acts where they were out taking care of parents that were ill and stuff. So, and those things just really chew into the budget when you have to replace them. So it just was one of those unfortunate years, I think. I'd like to get it back down, but I think for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been trying to increase my overtime budget. And we've tried to make do, and I'd rather stay at full strength and try to spend less money on overtime, but it doesn't always work out that way.
And I think too, with some of these things like FMLA, when those are benefits that are being offered and it's in the first couple of years, we don't really know, what sort of experience we're going to have with it. How many people are going to take advantage of the benefit. So I think knowing, how many people took advantage of it this past year will give us a good line of sight into next year's budget. Because I think we're facing that in other departments as well.
I think one of the things, and I've sort of been mentioning this for a long time now, is that the workforce is changing. And if there's I know when I had children, if I took 2 or 3 days off, I was usually thrown out of the house for, because I was more of a hindrance than I was a help. But, we're seeing families value and new employees. They're valuing the time with their families, and these are things that we push for, but it's generally, there is a changing workforce environment that appreciates time off, appreciates that value of family time. I think not that we didn't appreciate it, but I think we generally just had to work all the time. And that's definitely changing. We're finding that people don't want to work 60, 70 hours a week anymore. They're more than content to work their 40 hours and manage their budgets.
I'd love to have a 60-hour week.
I got one thing you could cut out. Well, it sounded to me like this year, so I've always tried to understand the overtime budget as that sort of sweet spot between staffing levels and overtime and coming to some balance. So there's that piece of it, but it seems like there were also a little bit of happenstance here that kind of created the situation for this fiscal year. But, I agree with you, Mary. I think that overall, municipal overtime is one of those variables that we owe it to ourselves to try to get our arms around a little bit. So I think that's a great idea.
I have a different comment. I think that police and fire overtime is hard to predict. The nature of the work, can cause, an acute demand for services. I'd say the nature of the work that's done by the DPW has changed. Night work isn't something that has been going on forever, and I see the fatigue factor setting into the force in the ability to cover these details and then work their regular shift and go to court. So I think that this is a complex question that doesn't lend itself to easy answers. So I just urge circumspection going forward.
Thank you.
I think the department needs to, maintain both departments need to maintain their strength levels for sure, because there's an expectation of protection, whether it's in the police or the fire realm. So I'll take a motion.
Make a motion to recommend a transfer from the reserve fund to the Hingham Police Salary Overtime Account in the amount of $30,000.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The next one is for the police department expenses. The amount requested is $16,000. This year, the police department has had discussions with the Personnel Board and the Board of Selectmen about changing the type of promotional testing provided under civil service law. We have contracted with the company to provide an assessment center for the ranking of promotional candidates of sergeant and lieutenant. Our goal is to provide the most qualified candidate possible for the future management staff of the HPD. This testing will require $16,000 in additional funding. We have maintained tight control of the expense budget to help defer budget deficits. This request will ensure we have funding and allow the department to make permanent promotional appointments.
I've had conversations with both the chief and the deputy about this form of promotional venue, and I think that this is a healthy approach, frankly, to promoting tomorrow's future leaders within the department. Chief can speak to it himself, or the deputy, but I see it as a blend of skill sets with established professionals objectively assessing the qualifications of our candidates for the critical role of sergeant lieutenant. And I don't think we need to get into how critically important those positions are in the department. We got to get it right, so.
I've had those same conversations, over the last several months with both the chief and the deputy, and I concur with your remarks, Paul. I think it's money very well spent for the department and for the town.
Motion.
I move we recommend a transfer from the reserve fund to the Hingham Police Expense Professional Services account in the amount of $16,000.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
so
gentlemen.
much.
Did I name you next time?
Okay, unemployment compensation.
For advisory, sure.
Oh, we're gonna do it all in one night? Oh, okay.
Spending money tonight.
Okay, the next one
Ken
is,
is on fire.
the next one is for unemployment compensation in the amount of $3,000. And this is to cover the cost of unemployment claims for the rest of this fiscal year. For unemployment, we pay dollar for dollar. And in the last month, we did have somebody go on unemployment, and we just don't have the budget to cover it.
Entertain a motion to recommend a transfer from the reserve fund to the unemployment compensation account in the amount of $3,000.
Second.
All those in favor? Oh.
Aye.
You just wanted to say something, too.
Okay, that's it for the reserve fund transfers. Now we'll go into the inter and intra-department transfers, and we'll first have the inter, and I'd like the chief and the deputy chief of fire to come up. We have an inter-department transfer going from a surplus that we have in the group insurance line item to the fire department salaries of overtime. We have had multiple personnel on extended leave, both injury and sick leave, through this entire fiscal year. To maintain our minimum staffing levels, we had to spend more overtime than we were budgeted for.
I spoke to one of the deputies at the fireman's breakfast, and I have an understanding as to why this figure is what it is. Hopefully, we can get it under control in the near future. Any further questions?
No, I would just sort of remind people that when we have vacancies, when we have an unfilled open position, and it has to be filled with overtime, we're paying time and a half. And so, it just, if you have a couple open positions for a long part of the year, the numbers just don't work in your favor, and it's pretty challenging.
I've had some conversations with the chief as well on this, and I understand or I don't pretend to understand all of the challenges of the overtime, but I understand the explanation. One quick question, Sue, the group insurance, we have 200, how much more, do we have more money in group insurance, or does this zero out group insurance?
This will not zero out group insurance. We will still have a surplus.
Okay. I'm set.
Motion.
I move that we recommend an interdepartment transfer to the fire department salaries overtime account from the group insurance account in the amount of $200,000.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
And coupled with this, the fire department has pinched their pennies, and they are doing an intra-department transfer from fire department expenses to the fire department overtime in the amount of $25,000 for the same reason as the inter-department transfer.
I just make the point more for the public's benefit that with all the municipal budgets, we can't move money between salaries and expenses. And so if there's any movement of any dollars, it has to be done in a public meeting, properly posted, which I just think gives a lot of transparency to budget dollars. And while sometimes it probably feels like an administrative burden, I think it's keeping visibility and transparency of taxpayer dollars.
And it can only be done in the last 2 months of the fiscal year.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
That's why we're in here in June doing this. We can only do it in May and June.
Well, and I know that staffing has been a challenge, overtime's been a challenge, and I just appreciate the fire department, trying to work within their budget to make a contribution to those liabilities for the town. So I appreciate this request, frankly.
I'd also like to point out, ladies and gentlemen, that the role of the fire department goes beyond putting out fires and taking people to the hospital. A couple of us tonight did a tour of a rather large housing complex, and the fire department's intimately involved in that. And I'm very happy to see that they're proactive and staying right on it. So thank you, Chief, and thank you, Deputy, for that work. Really appreciate that a lot. Okay. Take a motion, please.
Make a motion to recommend an intra-department transfer from the fire department expense account to the fire department overtime account in the amount of $25,000.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night, gentlemen. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to invite the Superintendent of DPW, Randy Sylvester. These are intra-department transfers. The first one is from DPW salaries to road building expense in the amount of $70,000. The amount requested is necessary for the following extraordinary and unforeseen reasons: the necessity to disposal of soil waste pile from road building, a wall repair on East Street, and paving sidewalk and driveway aprons on Smith Road and Butler Road.
Aprons within the right-of-way?
Yes.
Good. Questions from my colleagues?
No, I'm good.
I'm all set.
Take a motion.
A motion to recommend an intra-department transfer from the DPW payroll account to the DPW road building account in the amount of $70,000.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
And the last intra-department transfer is from landfill, the expense account, to the salary wages account of the amount of $15,000. The amount requested is necessary for the following extraordinary reasons: supervisor's pay adjustment was unanticipated and not budgeted, and the shipping of trash trailers needed to be done on overtime more often than expected.
I have a comment. I'm happy to see that you reminded me of my expired sticker. Got that all squared away.
Excellent.
The dump is busy, or the transfer station, as you like to call it. That's an area, I think, that generates a lot of traffic, and I just appreciate the diligence that your team shows in managing it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I like going there too, so
That's good.
it works.
And you know, Randy, with your whole budget, and I take the snow and ice out because that's kind of Mother Nature. I mean, you know, your department is very much a public-facing department because it's you know, not only the transfer station, but it's care and custody of all the, you know, the public areas and keeping things groomed and, you know, picking up trash and you know, fixing potholes that appear during the winter. And it's just, you know, just like all the departments in this town, the demands on you and your team are probably beyond your capacity. And I appreciate the way everybody works, and I also appreciate that tonight, you know, you're coming in here and, you know, you're kind of moving money from one part of your budget to another, but you're managing within your budget, and knowing all the demands on you and your team, I really appreciate it, and my hat's off to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll give one particular shout out. Paul and I were recently at a dedication of the Eugene Creedon Park down at the shipyard. So if you commute by boat or you happen to be in the shipyard, take kind of the long way in. The DPW staff did an amazing job with the plantings commemorating Eugene Creedon, who is a landing ship sailor during the Second World War. And it's you know, that park is really a memorial to him, but also to all those folks who both built and served on those landing craft. And it's just such a, I think it's really a special spot to commemorate what went on actually in that shipyard. So it really was beautiful, and I know it was a lot of work. And to Mary's point, you know, people walk by and admire it, and they don't know who's behind it. And so I give a shout out to that.
Tunnel cap looks good too, man. Saw that tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's looking
Been on
really
that,
sharp. Yep, good work.
Shreen Park does a good job. Jeff
Yeah.
Anderhan and his guys.
Yep.
Absolutely,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Motion,
Make
please.
a motion to recommend an intra-department transfer from the DPW transfer station expense account to the DPW transfer station wages account in the amount of $15,000.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the last two, repurposing capital outlay. This happens when a department has capital outlay and the project has come in at a much lower cost, and there is something else they would like to do with the surplus. They do need to first talk to the town administrator and the town accountant, then they go to capital outlay for their approval, then they come here for your approval, and then they're gonna go next door for advisory's approval. The first one is to repurpose $30,000 of capital for town hall from the FY18 exterior painting 2 to interior door security. The original estimate for the town hall exterior painting was $100,000. The 5-year capital plan included $50,000 in FY17 and $50,000 in FY18. The actual cost of the painting, underway now, will be $55,000. Payment will be sourced from the $50,000 from encumbered and $5,000 of 18 money, leaving a surplus of $45,000 for FY18. The estimate for town hall interior door security changes is $30,000. The payment will become from the surplus of the painting. The remainder of the surplus of $15,000 will be returned to the general fund. And Tom's here if you have any questions.
I'd just like to comment generally about the painting of the town hall. I think it's coming out rather well. I know that over the past few years, I've had residents speak to me about its need to be painted, so I'm delighted it's coming in under budget, and it looks great.
Thank you. The work is all done. The contractor did a great job. 2 coats of paint are on there, which is nice. They did some sill work, replacing some old worn-out sills, window sills up in the eaves. Did a great job.
I couldn't watch him doing the cupola. I had to drive away.
Yeah.
That is not for the faint of heart.
No, it isn't.
So that you can encumber the 17 funds because the project, because we knew we were going to spend the money in 18. How does, I guess, why didn't the 17 funds fall to the general fund?
Because they encumbered it because they didn't start work until FY18.
And what's the criteria for that? So we get an allocation from capital outlay of $50,000 that we need to spend in FY 2017. We don't spend it, but we know we still have the project. So we can say, okay, we're going to hang on to the 2017 money.
The reason why is because in FY17, when we did the budget, we were short, and they decided to take $50,000 away from the painting and split it, 50 for 17 and 50 for 18,
Okay.
knowing this is what we were going to do.
Okay. And then you came in under budget.
Yes.
All right.
So there are like accounting rules too that govern what can and can't be encumbered.
Okay.
That we all, GASB has rules that municipalities have to follow.
Could be a topic for another night. maybe. And so otherwise, a project like this interior door security would have to wait for another whole capital cycle. Okay, thank you.
And just to underscore that a little bit, the reason that I'm bringing the door security project to you now and not waiting for the next capital cycle is, in my opinion, this is an urgent need. Something if I had seen the need at the last capital planning process, I would have requested it then. A couple of incidents have occurred during the course of the past year that have opened my eyes to an urgent need for this, both in my office and then in talking to some other offices in Town Hall. It became apparent that this was a regular occurrence, and I think we need to identify that this 2018, there are some strange things happening in the world, and to ask the general public to interact with staff at a counter is not an unreasonable request.
Right.
Motion?
Motion to repurpose $30,000 of capital for Town Hall from FY18 exterior painting 2 of 2 to interior door security.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
And the last one is for the Harbor Master, Ken Corson, if you could come on up. The Harbor Master would like to repurpose $6,000 of capital for the Harbor Master from FY18 Marine One collar to Marine One forward infrared camera. The collar for Marine One is being replaced. The 5-year capital plan included $30,000 in FY18 for this purpose. The Harbor Master succeeded in getting the new collar at no cost to the warranty, leaving only cost for the labor. The labor was estimated at $13,000, leaving a surplus of $17,000. The forward infrared camera for Marine One needs repair. The estimate for the camera repair is $6,000. Payment will be sourced from the surplus for the collar. The remaining of the surplus, $11,000, will be returned to the general fund.
Good job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Council,
I'm set.
take a motion.
I'll make a motion to repurpose $6,000 of capital for the Harbor Master from FY18 Marine One collar to Marine One forward infrared camera.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Thanks very much, Kate.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Hey, Sue? Sue, just a quick question. This capital repurposing policy, does it apply to the school department as well?
I do not believe so.
Okay,
I do not, I will have to, I'll look into that.
okay,
And
thank you.
I'll ask the capital outlay for a clarification.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sue.
Okay.
She goes to do it all again.
Yeah.
Harbor Resiliency Review. Now, one of my colleagues came tonight without having dinner,
Just saying.
so put it out there.
It looks as if you have color copies of the slide deck. So I had made up the ones that I wanted to target because I was asked to try to take what was an hour and a half discussion at the Harbor Development Committee and bring it down to 10 minutes, is what Tom
Thank
asked.
you, thank you so much.
But if you have those,
Eight,
then
10.
I think I can refer you.
All
I
right.
do want to include the public by getting the slides up on screen. Can we accomplish that?
To defer to the town administrator for that one.
Might need a reserve fund transfer for this.
Uh-oh.
Maybe you could just describe each slide, Tom, just in detail. Just
Yeah,
describe-
right, yeah, if we can't get this going.
Well, it's up there.
Do we have a
And can we-
page number, Bill?
Can we reduce the lights too so people can see? Is there a halfway point? No. On the other side?
That one, there, right there is the dimmer.
Turn it off
No.
first. Bottom button. Okay.
Oh, look at that.
Perfect, thank you very much.
Engineer.
Engineer.
That's an engineer.
How many engineers does it take to
I'm
dim
a
a light
liberal arts
bulb?
guy.
So to orient you, I'm Bill Reardon, Chairman of the Harbor Development Committee, representing the Development Committee, which met in April to come to a very key point in the whole issue of harbor wharf resiliency, which we're all very much focused on. My purpose tonight is to hopefully get the selectmen far enough so that you can hopefully concur with the recommendation of the Harbor Development Committee in terms of the treatment for resiliency that we are proposing for each of the 3 town wharfs, Town Pier, Barnes Wharf, and the Veterans Park area. So I will walk you through, I'm going to skip through a number of these slides and keep you focused on the key things, which if you think about it from a structural perspective, it's the height of the wharfs that we want to bring them up to. It's the design of where do we want that increased height to be? Do we want it to be at the surface of the wharf itself or stepped back? And then the question, more from an aesthetic perspective, but also a cost perspective, what materials? Are we talking granite? Are we talking steel? Are we talking armor stone? You know, those are the three kinds of choices that we need to walk through. So where do I point this? Up here?
Yep, just click it.
Okay. I want to just orient people a little bit. This is what we're talking about. That is Barnes Wharf on March 3rd. Underwater by about 2 feet. And one further back, that is Town Pier. Our harbor master has left, but as you can see, the harbor master shack was floating, attached only by its power cord. And we lost the septic system that was behind that. That's been repaired this spring. But it gives you all a sense of what we're up against here, you know, in a very difficult storm. So to go back, we're talking about this area and the 3 wharves, Town Pier here, Veterans Park here, including the old mobile station, and Barnes Wharf, which is right here, which is where Hingham Maritime is located, and there's a later conversation this evening regarding Hingham Maritime. So to remind you very briefly, chronology, we've been at this for 3 years. And I'm not going to walk you through all of this. You know these pieces. When we last met with you, we described the decision that the committee had reached that our engineers needed to resolve first, which is, well, what height are we going to target? And we walked you through the rationale for our conclusion that the targeted height would be 16.2 feet. And in doing that, we focused on this chart. You'll remember this, starting with Whitney Wharf, which was already roughly that height. And each of the 3 other piers that we were looking at were roughly 4 feet below that. So we will end up, if the recommendations are followed, with the town-owned portion of the harbor being a uniform 16.2 feet mean high water, right? Mean low water. It's also consistent with the heights at the bathing beach, the Armor Stone, and the new wall that's underneath the dune. So moving on then, the question then becomes, first, as I mentioned, and this is alternative 2. What I want to do is, we looked at in our meeting on April 10th, 3 different plans for each of these wharves in terms of where should the height be added. To give you a sense, at one point, we had looked at should we have a wall that was at the edge and then step back 3 or 4 feet, add another wall for 2 more feet, or should we do it all on the face of the existing wall? We have landed there, and I'll give you some commentary in terms of why that was the answer. But the recommendation is for Barnes Wharf, for Town Pier, this, which includes a 16.2-foot wall all the way around, and in the area that is now partially a granite wall, an armor stone treatment, not a full granite wall, but armor stone. That's an area that the harbor master really does not want a lot of swimming to go on because of the boat ramp right next door. And it did seem to make sense to tie this in, but get it to the targeted height that we are looking for at the rest of for Town Pier. Yes, I'll look for comments on any of these as we go. One other thing I will say, though, is that the parking situation here is simply something that we are exploring. There will be alternatives further down the road in terms of what do we do with parking. As you know, right now, parking is along this side. The objective, you'll remember, in terms of the harbor walkway is to have the harbor walkway be as close to the water as possible. So one of our members said, well, what would happen if you flipped this and flipped it over to this side? And this was one of the presentations to kind of consider that. But no decisions are being made now, and I'm not asking for your concurrence on the parking at all. My personal perspective is I want to preserve as much of the park as possible, and I want to cause less parking over here at all. I would rather have the parking be all out in front of the area.
Was there any consideration to simply extending the wall west to the anticipated new boat ramp? Just take that beach completely, or?
There was some, it's partly a cost issue. It's partly the nature of this wall. There's only a wall that goes about a quarter of the way across that. We are talking about an increase of height of about 4 feet. On the pier itself, we realize we're going to probably raise the grades to some degree of the hill. The Iron Horse will not be quite so high. To raise the grade further on this portion didn't seem to make as much sense, but.
How much are you talking about? 4
4
feet?
feet. Well, we're kind of thinking that for Town Pier, what we may choose to end up with, and this is, again, can be determined in the future, do we end up with, right now, if you have a baby carriage, you can drive it right off Town Pier and then into the harbor, or a bicycle. We're thinking that if we raise the wall 4 feet, but raise the land 2.5, so you have a bit of an edge, and that prevents the potential for falling off. So the land raise in this section, for example, will not be as great as 4 feet.
What's the existing height?
Of the wall there?
No, of the hill.
I can only tell you by looking at the millibars, and I would say those are 10 foot. Roger?
Well, it depends on where.
Going,
part of the
no,
hill.
to the top of the Iron Horse.
Oh,
I think it's 15 to the top of the hill.
Okay.
15.
Okay.
So that'd
So
be an increase.
you're still going to have the sense of the hill, but it will be somewhat flatter toward the harbor end. Okay? So I'm going to go on then to Barnes Wharf, and again, here we looked at a couple of different options. They principally related again to, do you have some wall here and not have the full height here? Or do you go the route that we're proposing, which is that most of the height is around the edge of the wharf itself? This is a small retaining wall. We're talking with Hingham Maritime about how that will work, and can we get it closer to the edge of the wall so that we're minimizing any impact on their parking, which is key. We did sit in on the conversation that HMC has had with the planning department and the conservation group. As it happens, the incremental height here, which again is going to be 3 to 4 feet, is actually something that they will need to do for their proposed construction in any event. So that we are fortunate that the two directions seem to be meeting in the middle, which I think is a good thing. There also is some work along this section because that is the very lowest point on Summer Street. And if you were to go there, you'll see cones because there was damage along this section of the wall this winter.
Is that outside of the state right-of-way?
It is outside the state right-of-way. The right-of-way, Roger and Tom can help me here, the right-of-way here is very thin, right?
Yep.
I don't know how many feet.
What about the rotary?
The rotary is town property, I believe.
It extends out beyond the rotary though, right? The right-of-way?
All the walls are outside of the state layout, so all the walls belong to us. Yeah.
Is the proposal to build a new wall on top of an existing wall, or step it behind it?
You talking about this piece, Paul?
Yeah.
That would be stepped behind.
You haven't talked about the design at all yet, right?
With, in terms of what materials?
The walls.
We'll talk, that's next. I'm doing this in step. We talked about height. Now we're talking about where do you put the height, then we'll go on to materials. So going on to the
Can I
last.
just raise another question?
Sure.
Raising the wall heights protects the existing wharfs, but it's not going to protect a major storm surge from inundating North Street or Station Street because the walls aren't being raised throughout the harbor. Is that a fair statement?
I will answer that in the way that the Harbor Development Committee has been thinking about this, and that is look, we have to look at this as a system. There are things that we can do, and when we can, we should be opportunistic about it. There are things that we cannot do because it's private property.
Right.
Kenny's Wharf or Nick Bond's Wharf. There are portions of town-owned property that are subject to state jurisdiction. The boat ramp, which was a problem. And we are negotiating now with the state about,
Rotary.
perhaps, well, the Rotary is another issue. We basically have taken the view that, look, Roger keeps telling me, don't count on when the state does Route 3A fixing the Rotary wall, because it's not their wall, it's our wall. But it does seem to make sense.
Sure
You
about
don't
that.
tackle this now when you have that project out there in the future. So that's going to be the time to opportunistically address that wall. To the extent that we're dealing with private property owners down there, and they are considering things, we want to be exploring with them exactly the point of where, you'll remember that the Kleinfelder study showed us where the low points were. We're addressing several of those low points with these wharf situations. Some we cannot. Some, in the case of major storm surge, we may well, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, be into the mode of temporary barriers that you bring in to block off Route 3A before it gets to North Street, coming in over the bathing beach or something on that order.
My concern is the sewer pump station on Station Street.
Of course, that's a
That's
major
the big one.
concern for us. So this is addressing, as I said, opportunistically, the things that we can do now that are in our control.
And you're certain that that wall by the Rotary is town-owned?
Yes. Yep.
It is somewhat higher than our lowest wall, but it's not as high as what we're proposing here.
So you're gonna raise that up as well?
Well, we're, again, not now,
part of this
not part of this plan.
Okay.
If I may, just, as part of the statistical analysis that was undertaken prior to this part, and it was extensive, we looked at a number of things that included a consequence score, what happens at what location if the water comes up and over, the likelihood of that happening, targeting a certain year based on what's anticipated with respect to sea level rise. So as part of the prioritizing which wharfs get done first, the ones that are before you now are the ones that are the lowest. So those are the most vulnerable. So to answer your question, by raising these walls, is that going to prevent the likelihood of downtown flooding? The answer is yes. But there are other locations that still would need to be raised to make it 100%. So yes, it will improve that. It would make it less likely that that would happen. Okay?
Doesn't want to go to its lowest point, though.
It does, but even if you looked at some of these locations where we had, for example, Barnes Wharf flood, it didn't flood 3A. At some point, it stopped at 3A. So that wharf and that location flooded. Now you have to start to look at what's behind that wall at that elevation, folks. So it's not just it's at the wall, what's immediately behind the wall, and then if it overtopples that, what happens? You mentioned the sewer pump station. We could build a dam around the sewer pump station, protect the sewer pump station, but instead of doing that, you attack the location that's the most vulnerable at the waterfront, and that prevents that sewer pump station from becoming vulnerable at that point.
Paul, the other thing I would just remind us is that Kleinfelder's study was in part to tell us exactly, well, which components of our infrastructure are at risk. So that if, over the planning cycle and the construction cycle, we were to redo, for example, the pump station in Station Street, it should be raised. It should have its own resiliency plan. Foster School, absolutely part of the equation as we look at Foster School.
Right.
So this is going to be a multi-teamed effort.
Yep.
So going on to the third, this is Veterans Park. This is Whitney Wharf here. This is the parking area. The Veterans Memorial, or the Vietnam Memorial, is right here now. This is the old mobile station parcel. We looked here at first a couple of different alternatives. Do you build, for example, a wall like the other walls, a granite wall, but there has never been one here, and cost-wise and permitting-wise, a much bigger bite. Instead, we looked at two two different alternatives for using armor stone as the protector, which is effectively what's there now, but it's simply not adequate. Karen, I know you came down when you saw the amount of eroding that's gone on above the armor stone that is there, and the armor stone is not really heavy armor stone like we have at the bathing beach. So here we toyed with three different approaches in terms of how much armor stone, because armor stone is coming up the land and you're eating up park. And we didn't want to do that, so we have gone, if you can see the difference between that, where the armor stone is wider, I think it's a 7-foot difference between that version and this version, which is our recommended version.
What's the slope on that?
Roger,
It's-
Tom?
It's about 1 to 3. Yeah.
Into pier, over into the hub?
Yes. Oh, no, and in part, the other rationale for this is the land here does continue to come up to Route 3A. So to some degree, if we're topped above the armor stone, the land is a continuing protector, and there's nothing to preclude us from adding incrementally onto this to expand it at a later time.
That tree grove is preserved,
Sorry, it is currently, yes.
and it will be?
No reason not to. This is the line of trees between the two properties.
Yeah, I think they're sycamores.
They're not. It's actually kind of a scrub, Paul. It's not a high-end tree, I don't think. But we open to
Just to see
discussion.
what
This does not impact those trees. So, those are the proposed design treatments. Now I want to go on to materials. And this was another key part of our equation. And here, we're looking at pages 15 through 18 of your, but I'll show it up here as well. So this is to give you a sense of, just to remind you what armor stone, serious armor stone looks like, as opposed to if you were to go behind the Veterans Park now. This is our own bathing beach. The part that was built was the very first repair in front of the bathhouse. We had exactly what we're seeing on some of these other locations where the prior stone was not sufficient, tides were going above it, eating away the bank. We were literally losing bank in front of the bathhouse. By moving to this treatment, which comes up at an angle and then flattens out, this is similar to what's also on Wollaston Boulevard. Very heavy stones, not likely to move in a significant way. So that's to give you a sense of what that looks like. One of the proposals was, well, you could do steel sheathing for particularly the upright things like Barnes Wharf or Town Pier. This was Fall River, which had a similar situation, granite wall that was deteriorating. Here they are in the midst of the repairs. They're putting the steel sheathing down. And here's a little bit of what, on the left, it looks like when you're done. Our committee considered this. We've also shared these photos with the Historical Commission, Historic Districts Commission. We were not enamored of either the steel sheet pile nor the classic concrete seawall, which is akin to what Situate or Marshfield. This is more targeted at oceanfront waves, big, high splashing, and we don't have that in Hingham. So instead, the route that we are recommending for both Barnes Wharf and for Town Pier is a granite seawall akin to what we have now. This would mean taking the wall down where it is in need of repair, backfilling, building it back up again, plastic material behind it, low-level gravel, and then landscaping as well. That's the direction for those two, and armor stone for the Veterans Park mobile station. So the next and very important piece is cost. I had said at the beginning of this project years ago that our issue was balancing safety, how high, how much resiliency do we build in? Aesthetics, what does this look like? How does it feel in a town like Hingham? Does it seem to make sense? And cost. So what we've been able to do with Beals and Thomas assistants and Roger and Tom is to put this schedule together. I urge you to take a look to your own detail because it's very hard to read on here. But I'm made on my changes. This shows alternate 1, alternate 2, alternate 3. It really is, this is the recommended alternative, which you see says town pier, granite seawall, plus a portion of a armor stone. Barnes Wharf, a granite seawall, and Veterans Park, armor stone. These other alternatives would have been a concrete seawall or coated steel sheathing. So what's been done here is to price out each of those alternative treatments, and then very importantly, focus on the life expectancy of each of those treatments. And Roger and Tom did the work talking to a number of different engineering firms about, was this the right way to look at this? The objective was, here we have total dollars, roughly 9.2 million, and that does or does not include, Roger, the
Sheeting, and SOE, supportive excavation, it does.
yes, okay.
Yeah.
As opposed to 8 million for the concrete look, or 6 million for the steel. But the difference is this very important factor down here, and you're familiar with this terminology where Roger looks at roads and other major capital projects and says, what's going to be the cost kind of per year of expected life of this asset? And when you do it that way, you find that the cost per the life cycle cost over the average life cycle, because this is 85 years for granite and somewhat less than that for armor stone, is $126,000 per, that's an annual figure, Roger, right? Versus 160 for what initially looked to be a cheaper, and even cheaper over here, but much shorter life. Hence, our recommendation, and by the way, the recommendation of Beals and Thomas, our consultants as well, they believe that the appropriate balance is this balance here for a cost of roughly 9.2 million. I will mention a couple of things. It is clear to us that if you do the cofferdam, if you do the steel sheathing route, you can't build on top of it. Whereas if you do a granite wall now at 4 feet, and 15 years from now we need to go higher, this will be designed such that the base of the wall could support it.
Bill, is there an armor stone product instead of the granite that makes any sense to price out? So you've priced out the revetment with armor stone, but are there synthetic stone materials that make sense to consider that may be cheaper than the granite?
Or the granite seawall for Town Pier and Barnes Wharf?
Yeah.
No.
No?
No.
Part of this
Not.
is the question of how would you transition from what we have to what the new material would look like.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of, that aesthetic balance.
You'd be using the existing material though, right?
As much as we have, of course, but to add 4 feet across two.
Right, you'd have to get more.
Gotta get more.
Would you be including the granite slabs that we have graciously donated to us by?
I've mentioned that to Roger. He is well aware whether that is sufficient height, but I'm well aware of those coming from the Lincoln Building.
Right.
Yes, we're aware.
Like as a cap or something?
Yes.
So other than concrete, leaving steel out for a second.
Yes.
Because I do like the idea of being able to improve these as we learn more or as conditions change. Other than concrete, there's really the only other choice is granite for those two seawalls.
No, well, it's concrete, it's steel sheeting,
Yep. But I'm leaving the steel sheething out.
Steel sheeting out, then that leaves granite, yeah.
Okay.
And when we say granite, there's the vertical granite wall, or but the third or quasi fourth option is the armor stone wall, which was demonstrated. Yeah, it goes up at an angle, and it's what you see now at the bathing beach.
Okay.
And I should tell you that in terms of distinction, in terms of weighing these options and what's being applied, and that's what you're looking at, by the way. You're weighing in on what we're going to advance from a permitting and design. I want to be clear.
Yes.
So we're weighing, so for example, where those, at Veterans Park, where we're recommending that armor stone versus a vertical granite wall, one of the reasons why we're recommending that is that the granite wall costs about $1,500 a foot, and the armor stone wall costs about $300 a foot. So we're talking millions of dollars in terms of order of magnitude, in terms of difference in price.
Right.
The takeaway is that we're headed landward at the Veterans Park, for example, in order to make that, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, that slope work, you have to head, so you're giving up some of that with the hope that there's going to be substantial savings in cost.
I'll also point out that Veterans Park, from the visual perspective, if any of you are boaters or just down there, if you're on the water, you don't see Veterans Park, the wall, because there's, John Kenny's Marina is there are boats. I row along there, and you're really not terribly aware of it in the same way that in kind of the iconic rectangular seawalls.
Yep.
Another piece that you do need to understand is if you do the granite wall look for Barnes Wharf and for Town Pier, an integral part of that is what's called a cofferdam. It looks like that. You have to literally build a cofferdam around the entire area so that they can work in dry conditions, take the old wall apart, put the new wall together. If we do this at the same time or sequentially, you can use the same cofferdam materials, particularly these steel pilings, pull it out of one job, bring it over to the other. That is or is not included in the cost estimates, the potential synergies.
Yeah, so we did look at that. We looked at, it's tough to quantify because what Bill's describing is just an economy of scale and economy of resources. So you take the same material, and if you were doing 2 or 3 locations, you'd be able to pick up and just move to the other location. Simply, that's just it. How much that would, we have, what that would mean in terms of total savings, that we didn't quantify that. But what we do know is that in terms of the cost associated with doing the wall itself and then preparing to do the project is pretty high. So, 30–40% of the cost is just getting ready to do the actual project. But again, the economy of scale, we didn't quantify that. It's tough to say. We'd be just guessing we can.
So a few final comments, and then I'll open up to general questions. I think it's fair to say that the Harbor Development Committee kind of weighed all of these things. Height decision first, which we had to deal with first, then the design elements and where, and it became clear that the issue of using a stepped back wall wasn't taking advantage of the fact that this kind of treatment has to happen. If you're going to do that once, you ought to get as much height on the wall as you can. You want to design so that if we have to add to it, we've talked about it as kind of building block supplementally. If we need to be thinking long term here, and to take advantage of the very high cost of that getting ready with the cofferdam, it made sense for those two. And then a bit of a trade-off. Veterans Park and Mobile Station, not as visible. Not a lot of, some loss of parkland, yes, but a big cost differential. If you were going to save anywhere, that one seemed to be the one that made sense. I will share with you that both Historical Commission and Historic Districts Commission, which has jurisdiction over Town Pier, heard this same presentation and agreed with the recommendations. You'd kind of expect that they might, because...
What do you mean they have jurisdiction?
They have jurisdiction, the...
materials you can use.
The materials that are in use are part of the Historic Districts Commission oversight of Town Pier. So, just finally, where are we? We're here tonight, and we've we've developed our recommendation, had occasion subsequently. The only people I have not yet met with was advisory because they did not want to meet until their new members were brought on board. And there's no money request here. The request in front of you is for authority to continue to move down the path using the funding that we already have from town meetings in 2016 and 17, and complete the design and permitting so that we can be as ready as possible for potential funding. I had, on my own version, said, okay, we bring it to the Board of Selectmen to prove the preferred design alternative, and then Beals and Thomas advances it. But the last item that ought to be right here is exploring funding sources. As you know from town meeting, our first shot at that is to file with the Seaport Bond Council. The next round is in August. That's why I've been trying to get in front of you as soon as possible, because we'd like Beals and Thomas to be as far down the road on permitting and design as possible so that we could apply for an early grant. You may have seen state Boston Globe articles about Governor Baker's capital budget, including money for sea level resiliency. The whole objective here is to be ready with the whole project. Hope to fund a portion of it with state funding, and then with the town thinking about what do we do for the rest. So that's.
And what has the Harbor Development Committee thought about the town funding the rest?
We have not pursued that. I mean, Mary, I think that's really a discussion with the advisory committee, and a sense of how much one might be able to get from the state. We are not Situate or Marshfield with the photogenic opportunities of the 30-foot waves, but the two photos I showed you at the beginning are fairly compelling in terms of the impact on this town. So I think there's a case to be made. Tom and I attended a session in Boston at the State House a month ago, talking about the sense that this is a statewide issue, and that it really has to be addressed, by the state as a whole. Been some thought, you might have seen the article last week or the week before, saying that UMass is probably going to come out, has come out with a study saying that the notion of a big dam out there between Deer Island and Hull is probably not going to make it. So we're back to, the article concluded, cities and towns. Boston is doing its own thing. Mayor Walsh, you do it with resiliency, you do it with developers, you do it with municipal projects, and you are opportunistic. To respond, Paul, to your very first question.
If I could just piggyback on that just for a second. I was going to get to it later, but it seems appropriate now. So the board authorized the town to seek municipal vulnerability program funds about a month ago or so. And we applied for that. We got $19,500 award through Roger and Mary Savage Dunham working together about 2 weeks ago. They submitted their application. We got the award. And that program, if we're named an MVP community, would open the door for additional grant funds for this type of work, in addition to Seaport Bond Council and others.
My understanding with the Seaport Bond Council is that until the snack shack is built, the last I heard, so correct me if I'm off on this, is that until the snack shack is built, the Seaport Bond Council is not inclined to entertain applications from the town?
Yes.
Okay, so
Karen Polito, when she was in Situate 2 weeks ago, made a point of saying Situate has, delivered on its projects, and we like that. And we have delivered on many of our projects for the harbor, but the snack shack has been challenging, and it is fair to say that it may be challenging to try to go to the Bond Council without that project being further along.
I mean, I had understood that it was, we shouldn't even put something to the Seaport Bond Council until that project was completed. Did I misunderstand that, or?
I don't know what your source was, Mary. I mean, we know that, look, this is a political process, and the state, wants to see its funds being used as intended. So, sure, there's the give and take, but I don't know that, it's not a matter of statute. It may be just a matter of political practicality.
I'd like to thank you for that excellent presentation and the work that you're doing down there. That was very informative. I think we need a little bit of time to digest what you've presented tonight.
Tom had told me you probably would not make a recommendation tonight, but probably at your next meeting.
That is an accurate prognostication. It's a lot of money.
Oh, of course it is.
It's needed, in terms of our ability to withstand, the changes in our environment. I'd like to just kind of chew on it a bit. And
From my perspective, Paul, I think the decision at this point is, is this a prudent design, plan, and permitting decision with existing funding? We're not funding, we're not actually funding this, that's the next phase, and that's going to require a political effort with our representatives at the State House, and perhaps create, Mary, I know that at your June 5th meeting, you presented the whole panoply of capital projects, and I think Harbor Wharves was one of them. There's a lot on the town's plate. All this needs to be considered, but back to the basic premise, which Garrett, Bradley, and Bob told us years ago, get it designed, get it permitted, get it ready, so if you get a chance, you go for the money. And that's what we're trying to do here.
right, but, I don't have an argument with that, but we're also working on a 3A corridor.
Oh, sure.
And we've got a very aggressive undertaking going right now. We're working on a pilot program that's taken, a lot of energy to get lifted off the ground. To the extent that any of this could be combined, we owe it to ourselves to, try and see if that's realistic too. I have a couple of questions. Is there an assumption that the harbor itself will remain unchanged in terms of its depth or its channels or anything like that? Has there been any consideration or discussion as to whether or not something of that nature could alter your calculations on the heights?
Ken Corson, you're probably aware, has had extensive work done with sonar analysis of the harbor because we're coming up on the dredging cycle.
Right.
In 2019 or 2020. Currently, we've seen the initial cut at that and initial estimates of cost. Premature, not tonight's agenda.
Yep.
But what we have seen calls for the basin to pretty much be what we have now.
Okay.
Not dramatic.
Is the depth of the anticipated seawall reconstruction or pier walls, is it going to go any deeper subsurface than presently?
You want me to give it a shot?
Go ahead.
Okay. See, answer your question, you answered. You're doing great.
Well, you talked about
Yeah.
capacity to carry weight.
So the dredging will have no impact on the walls and the effect in the forces associated with the inner harbor. And the foundation will be pretty close to a conventional foundation. It will be placed on a concrete footing, basically. That's not what's there now. It seems to have lasted almost 100 years, I think. But it's going to be a conventional foundation that will consider everything that you talked about.
If granite is indeed the material used, is it going to be pinned, or is it just going to rely on its own weight?
We haven't got to that point. My suspicion is that there are parts of the upper wall that will probably have to be pinned. The cap, for example. The back of the wall typically are battered so that the weight's back towards the landward side. But a lot of that's going to depend on the second part of the project, which is underway now, which is doing the geotech engineer, the bearing capacity of the soils, and that impacts all the stuff that you're describing.
Are they have you made any preliminary findings of what the soils are? Are they uniform throughout the harbor?
Yeah, they're pretty uniform. They're not very good, as you might expect. So I don't know if there's a specific surprise there, but now comes sort of the math associated with the soils that are out there.
Is it fill?
It's tough to say. It's, the best way to describe is what you would probably find in a conventional dredging to a certain depth, and then once you get below that, the material does change slightly. But I wouldn't describe it as fill, where you're closer to the wall, certainly, but as you go out beyond the wall, not so much.
Remember the industrial start of most of these wharfs. Thompson's coal yard was where the Iron Horse is. So, you know, a wall was built for that purpose, barges coming up, offloading coal, you know.
I'm just trying to anticipate surprises.
Yeah. The purpose of a lot of Beals and Thomas' early work was to do that kind of borings and test pits, so that we would have a sense of what's there.
You okay over there, Bob?
I'm still with you.
Okay. All right.
I'm just
think
saying
I've
that
asked enough
this is a lot. If you're watching this at home, this is a lot to digest. But in its full glory, it's on the Hingham public access.
Thank you very
channel.
much for this.
Yeah, our full
appreciate it.
meeting was televised. One of the things you asked early on is, hey, let's make sure we have as much visibility as possible. It's still there, and I've been assured by HCAM, or its new name, that it will stay there.
And what's the date of that meeting?
April 10th.
May I ask a question?
Bob, you don't have to watch it.
Roger,
We'll fill you in.
It's like you were there.
Roger, you're probably best able to answer this. Just looking at these different materials and the life expectancy, can you please explain to me why granite has almost twice the life expectancy as concrete? Not an engineer, I would have maybe expected the opposite.
No, that's a good question.
And I think of granite with it being pieces and places where water can get in between.
So if, and maybe some of you do, if you have a concrete sidewalk at home, or even if you're walking down North Street now, you'll see the effects of salt on concrete. There are additives you can put in concrete, as we did on the Downer Ave wall, that mitigates that corrosion. So concrete doesn't like salt. It doesn't like to be out of the salt water and in the salt water. It oxidizes, it changes, there's a chemical reaction that takes place. So those effects really hurt the life expectancy of concrete versus granite. It's so dense and hard that salt doesn't damage it the same way, as you can see just based on what we have out there now.
And one other question for you both is, you know, to the extent that you do engineering, design, visual rendering, permit documents, what sort of a shelf life do those documents have?
So the permits, depending on which permit, they do have shelf lives, and just about every permit you can imagine needs to be filed for these walls, including Chapter 91 licenses, which don't currently exist at these locations. So the permits are subject to extension or expiration. Offhand, I'd have to get back to you on those particular numbers. We do have a matrix that shows that, but the design should last. Yeah.
I mean, and again, this is really helpful, and it's excellent, and I appreciate that you're coming back to us in pieces, because it's a lot to take in each time. You know, one of the things I'm kind of struggling with is just the cumulative financial impact of all the different capital projects. So one of the things I'm thinking about, and I understand the importance of, you know, shoring up the harbor. I mean, it's in many ways a safety thing, it's protecting our assets, but, you know, there's also part of me that says, you know, could you, you know, would it be worth considering, you know, for example, doing half of the project at one point, and then the second half perhaps a few years later. And I realize there may be economies of scale. We'd obviously need to talk about all that, but, you know, the $10 and $15 million bites, you know, I got a letter from a taxpayer today talking about, you know, the difficulties of staying in the community and the number of big projects that the town has. And so I'm trying to think of creative ways to do as much as we can, being mindful of other capital projects, and again, mostly, you know, the cumulative effect on the taxpayers. So, you know, just you know, as we talk about this, you know, at our next meeting, that's one of the things that I'm going to be kind of teasing around in my head, because, as I said, we're, you know, every single project is worthy, and you know, I'm just trying to figure out a way to advance everything, advance as much as we can, even if it's not, you know, to the full 100%, as a first step.
Well, and I guess my piggyback point on that would be kind of Paul's earlier point, and that is, as the state reimbursement landscape solidifies and our planning along the 3A corridor solidify, like, you know, there's some movement here that I agree with you, Bill, like I think there's some utility to having a project ready to go, while at the same time, I think watching what's going on around us that influences how we spend our money, when we spend our money, and frankly, how much of our money, you know, we have to spend.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, I think in having this next opportunity to sort of kick the tires on this, one of the things that we do, as you know, is we get to certain points with projects and we don't just spend design and permitting money to spend design and permitting money. So I do appreciate all of this work going into this, to make thoughtful considerations about continuing to spend the money that town meeting's already allocated to the project. So anyway, I share your I think concern for understanding what the relevant permits are and the shelf life of those permits.
And part of my reason for bringing that up as well is, you know, I so appreciate all the great work the Harbor Development Committee is doing. You know, if the board says, you know, we like these options and things, to me, I'm not signing up for a $9 million project.
Absolutely.
And you know, I think to me it's you know, continuing to advance an idea. And I think sometimes, you know, with some projects we go forward with something and, you know, as a town we say, oh, well, we've gone this far, we can't turn back, you know, we can't turn the money down from the state or, you know, whatever. I think it's just important that we all kind of have some of these conversations together so that everybody understands the pressure points that we're all facing.
I'd only add that, you know, I see it not only as protecting the harbor, but I see it as protecting the roadway. And we've got, what, 25,000 vehicle trips a day going through there. That would be a catastrophic interruption if that was compromised due to, you know, a serious storm event that undermined the roadway. You know, I know the kind of numbers we're talking about for the Summer Street 3A corridor. I think if we can somehow, you know, through our state reps and senator, get this conversation going at a higher level, we might be more successful in getting funding for.
That's a great.
I would observe that you may have noticed, those of you who drive back and forth to Boston, what got fixed really fast by the state after the major storms between the bathing beach and the lobster pound. The sidewalk was eroded, the water came over, went straight into, I forgot what that pond is called. You know, new armor stone's been put in underneath the sidewalk has been redone. The other piece, which Paul, I know you'll be aware of, is Wallaston Beach itself. Very, very heavy armor stone, but it got damaged.
Yes,
and it has been fixed, and the state jumped on that. So you're absolutely right, and I think the state does, you know, feel significant responsibility here, and the discussion that we had with others at the State House was to acknowledge, you know, even the economy of the state works because of the eastern half of the state, Boston and all. So even Berkshire County, this is an issue, and it's as important as any other statewide issue, which I think is why Baker and others are saying, got to address this as a statewide.
Well, and it's not, you know, I think we're comparing in some ways apples and oranges in terms of the, you know, the sort of individual damage to individual homes on the waterways in Situate and Marshfield. But to Paul's point, this is an important component for commuter access to Boston. So I think each of these coastal communities has their role to play and their concerns about this very important issue.
Really can't thank you enough, though, for the hard work you've done. It's obvious, it's a great work product, so compliments.
If there are questions before your next meeting, would entertain them. I have some travel plans that may preclude me from making the next meeting. I may ask Roger to stand in for me if need be.
I can handle it.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll see about that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, we've come to that, well, let's do the appointments before I sign off.
So you have two appointments before you tonight. One is Mr. David L. Schuler, who represents the town at MAPC. MAPC is the Metropolitan Area Planning Council is asking that his term be renewed. Mr. L. Schuler has expressed an interest in doing so.
Somebody like to make a motion?
Yeah, I thank Mr. Al Schuler for serving, and I'd make a motion to reappoint David Al Schuler as the Town of Hingham's representative to the Metropolitan Area Planning Council for a 3-year term ending June 30th, 2021.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And the last is Ted Matthews as the associate member of the planning board. He's looking for a renewed term.
And I understand the planning board's in support of this appointment.
Yes, he's actively sitting on a couple of projects, and they have requested this, as has he.
Motion?
I move to reappoint Ted Matthews as the associate member of the planning board for a 1-year term ending June 30th, 2019.
Second?
Those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, at this juncture of the meeting, is going to be what's been characterized as an HMC, Hingham Maritime Review. My daughter continues to be associated with the Hingham Maritime, so therefore I'm going to step off and say goodnight. Before I do, tomorrow night, we're going to have a meeting on the 3A corridor, Summer Street. Part of that discussion is going to include how the diet is working out. I can tell you that it's been an interesting experience reading the emails from the different communities. So I expect that it'll be a lively discussion. You're all invited to come. It's a public meeting. Saturday, I had the pleasure of wishing our veteran service officer's son good fortune as he heads off to the United States Naval Academy. And tonight, my colleague Karen and I had a little tour of Avalon. I have to say that was quite the tour. You know, we have an excellent team that works for the town. This is not simple stuff. You know, our second floor and our public safety units have a big job, you know, both inspecting and making sure the permits are complied with. They're doing an excellent job. We had full representation tonight. The project's well underway. They anticipate taking some of their first tenants and some pretty high-end units, I might say. This time?
August, I think they said.
Okay. By August. So the work's going right along, and it was a very interesting tour that we got, seeing a project of that size under construction. So on that, I wish you all good night and good luck, you guys, on the rest of the meeting.
Thanks, Paul. Don't forget to tune in,
Adjust the
Channel
lights,
9.
Tom? Could we adjust the lights to get them back to?
It's got emailed to us, but it wasn't printed in the packets. It's just an email that Tom sent us. Oh. Kind of like the mood lighting myself. Yeah.
Want me to take off? Okay.
Sure.
So the next agenda item is Hingham Maritime Center review. Tonight, the board and Hingham Maritime Center are meeting to review the status of the Phase 1 term obligations as contemplated by the lease. Phase 1 expires on December 31st, 2018, but it may be extended in accordance with the lease terms. The Phase 1 term obligations are as follows. For the town, the town has to obtain the sewer approvals and wharf improvement approvals, and for HMC, to raise cash or bona fide commitments equaling at least 50% of the project funds and providing an affidavit with backup evidence of such funds. There are some caveats, as there always are. So if the sewer approvals and wharf improvement approvals are obtainable but cannot be obtained by December 31st, 2018, then the Phase 1 term automatically extends for up to 2 one-year periods. The first extension expires December 31st, 2019, and the second, if needed, would expire December 31, 2020. Based on the current status of the sewer and wharf improvement approvals, and subject to receipt of necessary permits and appropriations, these approvals are still obtainable, and therefore the Phase 1 term will automatically extend until December 31, 2019. I'll get into that here now. So what I'd like to do is...
But we're not extending the lease term tonight, right?
No, it won't need to be a vote or a determination by the board. What the lease contemplates is that if these items are obtainable, then it becomes automatic that they will, that the term will extend.
Okay.
So, the town's obligations under Phase 1 of the lease. The first is to obtain sewer approvals, and the status of that is as follows. By approving Article 16 at town meeting in April, the town approved up to $55,300 to contract with an engineering firm to compile and file an application with the MWRA to extend the sewer district in Hingham to include this property. The town has entered into this contract. Initial steps have been taken, and the MWRA is now evaluating the request. A meeting between the town and the MWRA will be held sometime in the next couple of weeks to determine next steps. As a matter of fact, I've heard that they're doing a new independent review of the boundary line. So there is a slight outside chance that the boundary line might be found to be outside of, or that the wharf could be found to be within the boundary line, which is what we were hoping all along, because if that
It's only like
happens...
30 feet, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
who's they that's doing
The
this?
MWRA.
Okay.
Yeah. So if that's found to be done, we're done, easy peasy, lemon squeezy, we're out. All right?
I'm going to put that in the minutes.
Well, that's
that,
fine. If
Sally?
that happens, I'm willing to have it in the minutes. All right, in the event the MWRA ultimately approves the application, the town would then need to get town meeting approval in April of 19, and immediately following an affirmative action at town meeting, the town would file for special legislation at the State House in the spring of 19. So in my estimation, my humble estimation, the town has made significant good faith efforts to fulfill the obligation of the lease under that term. Wharf improvement approvals. This is the second component of the town's obligation. By approving Article 14 at town meeting in April, the town approved up to $200,000 to be used for wharf improvements in conjunction with potential grant funds from the Seaport Bond Council. These funds are now to be coupled with $50,000 received from the Massachusetts Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, $19,500 received from the Municipal Vulnerability Program grant, and other potential grant opportunities, as I mentioned earlier, that will now be available to the town once we are designated as an MVP community. At a recent Board of Selectmen meeting, the board voted to adopt the recommendation of the Harbor Development Committee to identify Barnes Wharf as a priority project. That was done maybe a year-ish ago. And we heard that tonight, that was one of 3 projects being contemplated for the immediate future. And upon finalizing the design and engineering for Barnes Wharf, town meeting would then need to approve the construction costs of that project. Again, my humble estimation, the town has made significant good faith efforts to fulfill this obligation of the lease. So my opinion is that the town has fulfilled its obligations, and therefore the lease has fulfilled its obligations, but is unable to meet the obligation at this time, but that they are obtainable. And therefore, the lease could be automatically extended on December 31st, 2018 to the first of the 2 potential 1-year terms. And that does not require an affirmative vote of the board per se. So the second component of the review is Hingham Maritime Center's, maybe we could ask Hingham Maritime Center to come to the table and discuss their fundraising efforts to date. If that's okay with you, Mary.
So, on our fundraising, and you'll join me in this, we have the strategies and team in place to meet the deadline.
Meet the deadline of this December?
To meet the December 18.
Okay.
Everyone we've reached out to so far has been very positive and supportive. We have some donations, many generous donations and commitments in place now, starting down the path to the 1.7 million. That being said, the time frame on understanding what's happening with the wharf itself, because the wharf project the wharf work needs to be done before we can start building our building, which puts our building date off a number of years, makes it challenging to talk to donors when it still feels understanding the project's still sort of out there.
So in short, when you sit down with someone and say, we would like a very large check, the questions become, when is the details, when will it be built, where are you with the town process, etc. People aren't necessarily looking to part with their money immediately with the uncertainty. So, I don't know, prior meetings, did you touch on that we had retained a full-time fundraiser?
Yeah.
And a plan, so that is progressing really well. I mean, there are lists of the people in town who would be interested, and the cultivation process of meeting with them and explaining is going very well, and I'm exceedingly optimistic that we could meet the target if we needed to in December. We certainly will with the additional time of a year.
Right.
Okay. And it's certainly understandable, and it's sort of fortuitous that Bill was here tonight to talk about wharf improvements, because I think we got a taste of, the entire harbor, but also Barnes Wharf in particular. So, one of the things, Nancy, that we talked about last time when you were here were the conceptual drawings, because it strikes me that that's a piece to the puzzle as well. Not only the process point, but also what you're intending to build. And I know there was sort of some back and forth about, what might be possible on that site. And I know you had sort of one take at a building, and I think you've had some discussions around that.
Right. So the conversation we've had with Emily Wentworth in zoning and Mary from planning confirmed what we had identified as some of the variances and special permits we'd be needing to go after. I think we are comfortable with amending the building a bit, our original plan, to come a little bit more in line with those. There's still a handful of variances we'll need to get, but they seem to be in a more manageable variety.
Yep.
So the height?
We're going to still work on the height. That's
my impression was that some of those variances were pretty significant.
The height one is the key one, and that we need to keep working through that.
So, I'll ask the dumb question, I guess, and that is, we talked about this a little bit the last time. I look at that building a little bit as a range of sort of the most basic building that's going to meet the number in the lease, which is $3.5 million, right, of improvements required under lease. And then, if we could build exactly what we wanted, what would we build? So, one of the things I've been trying to understand is you know, the length and height of the building in part is governed, I think, or driven in part by the boat storage, right? So are there alternatives to the boat storage that wouldn't be in that building that are worth considering?
What makes us work as a maritime center is having boats on the wharf that we can use on the water. That's right there.
Yeah, but, okay, that's fair, but what I'm asking you is, do the boats need to be inside? Okay, there's a difference between having boats physically present on the wharf and having to build a building that accommodates those boats,
The most
right?
efficient way to store boats on the wharf is to have no building at all. And that you have ultimate flexibility about how you can move the boats around. What that does for our, what the town asked us to do was to build a boathouse as part of the lease. We have programming we offer.
Right.
Obviously, boats do better when they're stored inside and not exposed to the weather and the
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm asking you is,
we can work on them better if we have, you know, if we can store equipment and tools to take care of them.
well, I'm just, look, it's a big building, right?
Yeah.
And part of the height is because you need that first floor space.
Right.
Because the lease says something like, you know, you've got to have lockers and you got to have classroom space. And so you're thinking, okay, well, I got these boats and I got to do this stuff under the lease.
Right.
So what I'm trying to figure out is there a way to shrink the building, shrink the cost of the building, comply with the lease, and have storage for the boats that maybe not within this, you know, square footage wise, cost wise, right? Pretty expensive building. That's
Sure.
all. That's what I'm asking.
The vision for the property, and frankly, I think part of why the price tag got higher than a boathouse that you might build in Maine that stores boats and gets kids out of a thunderstorm. And when we were going through the lease process, that was the requirement. We need a place to keep the boats that are very expensive, and we need to get kids out of thunderstorms. And then we said, no, we're a community that actually wants a maritime center, and we want to build something of first rate as a maritime center that will be a year-round community facility. So the boats are hard to move, and maybe you could get fewer boats on the first floor, but we're also bumping against what the classroom multi-use space on the second floor that will be used year-round is like. And we're here in this room with a beautiful ceiling, and it's comfortable. When you get a lower ceiling classroom space, it's a very different facility. And I think that the balance of going for variances and that whole process, looking at who could actually be impacted by the view, if anyone, by going up a few feet higher, all needs more thought at this point. And we seem to have the time to go through a thoughtful process on that.
Okay.
And I think that's actually what we should do, and we've started to do as the
Okay.
board.
I just, you know, last time when we talked about this, you know, and I think Mary in part reminded me that, you know, churning through conceptual drawings gets expensive too. And I certainly don't, I don't want to put you through that. On the other hand, I want to make sure that we are pursuing a building we can actually build and a building that we can actually afford. Because churning through that process and not considering those points seems kind of useless too, so.
And I appreciate that.
And, you know, as Karen said at the beginning, because, you know, part of the challenge with, again, with the fundraising, and I can totally appreciate it, is people say, well, what are you going to build? And you want to show a picture that can be built. Because I think it would be to all of our misfortune if, you know, you get donations for a building and then the permitting boards and things, you know, it can't be built. And so I think, you know, one of the reasons that we've been asking staff to engage is to help give you a sense. And while, you know, obviously, you know, our staff people are really wonderful. And while they are not necessarily the decision makers, I think they have a very good line of sight to the different boards, to the dynamics, to some of the history. You know, especially down in the harbor, they know about projects that have happened in the past that can form precedents. So, you know, for me, and I think about this kind of, you know, part of this in here is that we have to sign off on a conceptual plan, to me, what will be really important to signing off on a conceptual plan is the feedback from staff. And, you know, as I've said, and, you know, Karen, I'll say this for your benefit, because, you know, you may feel differently about it, but, you know, we said in this lease, $3.5 million in a building that's like this. And, you know, my view would be that if we can't build a building to the specifications that we outlined, and that the cost of that building is below the minimum in the lease, I think that then we open up the lease and we address that. I mean, I don't, you know, it wouldn't be fair of the town to say, well, you know, you can only build X, but you still have to build a $3.5 million building.
Right.
Obviously, we wouldn't do that. I'm just hoping in this that you're really hearing what the permitting boards and what staff is saying, and while it may not be news that you necessarily want to hear, in some places, I think it'll help move things along. And again, what's important to me is that whatever we say to the public that we're going to build, which is the basis for your donations, we can follow up on it. And so I'm really glad that you're talking to staff. For me, and you know, planning zoning is not really kind of my wheelhouse, but I just think about recent projects in town that have come to a screeching halt because of height. And you know, the one that comes to mind is the Settles Glass Building. And everybody agrees that that project needed, you know, we need to do something on that site. It's unsightly, but at the end of the day, it was the mass and the height. And it was, I think in particular, the height that caused that project not to get a certificate of appropriateness from historic. So, you know, so part of the reason we're also pushing a little bit here is if that is going to be a constraint, what else can we do to work with you to find, you know, to think about some alternatives that would allow you to deliver the great programs you're delivering, you know, with all these different constraints.
And I think this process is very helpful as we digest the feedback from the last meeting and think about the options, so
I mean,
thank you.
you know, the worst thing in the world for any project is a slow no. And that's kind of what, you know, what I think there are aspects of this lease that have been designed to avoid that.
Yep.
But I think as we're thinking about the permitting and what can be built, I don't think the lease process really, you know, the lease process kind of said it has to go through permitting. But as we get closer to it, I just want to make sure that we're, you know, we're building, we're planning something that can be built. And,
Right. So I'm a little confused on what the timeline like ought to look like at this point in terms of, you know, you were obligated under the lease to deliver conceptual drawings to us by like December or something, right? This past December.
Right.
And Nancy brought those, and Tom and I sat with her.
Yeah, I'm not, I'm finishing my sentence. So part of the reason I'm confused is just if it seems like there's very little likelihood we're going to get, well, there's no likelihood we're going to get the wharf improvements done, right?
No.
And there's very little likelihood we're going to get the sewer improvements done. So to your point, there would be an automatic extension of another year.
That's right.
I guess I'm sort of, what I'm wondering, Mary, is just, we've had this lapsed deadline. You know, I don't know when it makes sense for them to sort of be required now to produce conceptual drawings that we would actually formally review. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we don't need to decide that tonight, but it seems somewhat artificial to force this if we know the lease term's going to be extended. On the other hand, you know, to sort of what Bill was talking about tonight, we want to continue to move forward in considering the project and to understanding what could be built on that site. So I just don't know what makes sense for timing on that.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
So it seems like what we might want to do to keep the ball rolling is ask HMC, which they've been doing, that we've had 2 staff meetings, I believe, one very recently. Ask them to continue working with staff towards that end and maybe have them come back in the fall with some sense of where they're heading, where they're going. Maybe we have some new plans at that point, some updated plans at that point. That way we keep everything kind of progressing.
Yeah, okay.
If we wait, if we were to wait until December of 19.
No, I'm not suggesting that
Yeah.
we do that.
Yeah, right.
I just, yeah. Fine.
There's an element too of our plans are impacted by what the wharf plans are as
Right,
well.
right.
And so we can make some progress on our plans, but until we know where the town's heading with their decisions on where the wharf work is heading, we don't want to get too far ahead of that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's part of my point. That's part of my point too,
and
right?
also fundraising.
Yeah, so, if the topography of that wharf is going to change by 4 feet or something that you heard Bill talk about tonight, and he has sort of a basic design, I would assume maybe that, and you're the architect, not me, but I would assume once he has kind of the design phase, at least conceptually figured out, you could factor that design concept into what would happen for you, right?
Yes.
Assuming that.
Right.
And we'd make an assumption that wharf improvement would move forward.
Yeah, and some of that will come from the discussion at your next meeting here in the beginning of July. So he'll have more guidance there about what design to move forward on. That will give them the certainty, or at least a little bit more certainty about what design is likely to happen.
Right.
And then how to design their building. So
right.
July 10th might help a little. Yep.
Okay. So then maybe the fall does make sense for another conversation around, further staff meetings, further input from the second floor, and a check-in back with us. And then maybe by the fall, we'd have some sense of when we should actually go through the process prescribed by the lease, which is the submission of conceptual drawings that we would then approve.
Nancy Bates, I know Bill mentioned that you've been in some of the meetings on the wharf and things, and with what he presented about, how the proposed resiliency efforts on Barnes Wharf, how much of that is influencing what you'd be doing?
The height that they're building to, and knowing that the selectmen sort of have approved that as the design that they're moving forward with their permitting on, will help us with how because we have certain heights that we need to meet to be out of the flood zone.
Okay.
So, if you came in a couple feet lower than what they're discussing right now, it would affect pieces of our design.
And are there decisions that we have not made yet that I'm just trying to understand what sort of inputs on the wharf resiliency are intertwined
The height
with
is the key piece, and then also where Roger and Bill were talking about kind of that step back wall and berm in the parking area.
Yep.
So we aren't rushing ahead with our parking layout until we understand what that piece will be.
Okay.
And then sort of out of your control immediately, but what the Rotary ends up looking like will affect our parking layout as well.
Because I think the height we endorsed, didn't we?
We endorsed the height. Yeah. In terms of the building itself, it's just, again, this is sort of your world, not my world, but I appreciate what you're saying about parking and about the Rotary. Does that influence the building? Does that influence the design of the building?
So the answer from the second floor staff would be yes.
Okay.
So the use and the density of use and the anticipated use will drive the parking need. I don't want to,
Right.
if I'm stating that exactly right, but there is a parking need calculation that is done based on the size and use of the facility.
But for the building itself?
So the size and use
Okay.
drives the parking need.
Okay.
So we need to, as we continue to work through our design on the building, need to factor in these conversations we've been having on parking and zoning issues. And there's a little bit of a push and pull on them. Do we understand them well enough to move forward with reworking the design?
That's a good way to
Where we
put
can
it.
talk to
Yeah.
you in the
What do you-
fall about it? Yeah, I think we're on track to do that.
And I know one of the things we talked about here, and then when we met as a follow-up, was that staff was going to try to just sort of give you a sense of what could be built on the wharf as of right. So, you kind of think of two extremes, and that's the starting point, and maybe, the drawing that you have is the other end. Are we,
So at our
is that being
recent
worked
meeting
on?
with them, we had talked through really what we could do as of right is not a building that is useful for boat storage or programming. And so wouldn't be something we would pursue.
Just for kind of my information, just to kind of get.
Essentially a 20-foot wide building, which is not even really wide enough for
Okay.
a single boat bay for rowing shells.
And how high, please?
Well, that would be a one-story,
Okay,
20-foot wide building.
okay.
So there would be no second floor component to that.
Mhm.
We looked through, we can get into the weeds of the zoning rules, but we've looked through a way to do a second floor, but still stay within the height limitation. Whether that's an effective second floor is a piece that we're still
Mhm.
working through as a board.
And I would say that, when you come back to us, there were a couple of things on the town side that, we said not only, this financial investment of a minimum amount that was part of the RFP, and then the amount in the lease. And then there were also certain things that the town asked for with respect to space and facilities for the high school programs. So, I think we need to be open to the possibility that, depending on the input from the permitting boards, if the HMC building, has to be smaller in some fashion, we may have to have some conversations about, both the investment piece and the implications for some of the asks for the town.
Yep, I agree with that.
I don't think, things like, a place for the rowing team to kind of put backpacks, hopefully that's not a showstopper, but again, I guess.
The biggest of our stumbling blocks.
Yeah, yeah.
And certainly, of course, we want to accommodate the kids and keeping their stuff safe, and so it may not be lockers or a locker room, but there'll be something that accommodates that.
Okay.
So we don't need any formal action.
I just want to make sure that I'm up to date with. Grid.
My favorite document, at least.
Yeah. It's the only way I understand all of it. Are we up to date with all the reporting requirements, Nancy? The tax form and all that kind of
Yes.
stuff? Okay,
Yeah.
good.
That was the 350-page document you got last meeting.
Great. Okay, and how'd the spring season go? Do you have a sense of how the spring rowing season went for the high school from the Maritime Center's perspective?
I think from our perspective, really they were largely at Bear Cove.
Bear Cove, yep.
It was very helpful to us to not have the docks in for the March storms.
Yeah, especially this
and
year.
Certainly,
Yeah.
adds to the longevity of the docks that we have as we move forward on, we're working to replace them, but if we can do it on our timeline rather than the docks timeline, that would be good. That worked fine. We've been working very well with the high school team and great communication and sort of as we're making any moves, and we're working together on that.
Great. And we've had some correspondence, right? From
Yes, we did. Received a letter from Jack Chapin and Logan Greenlee and it was forwarded to me by the athletic director, Jim Quattromoni, that stated that the program in Bear Cove was a success, and they would hope to be able to do it again next year, have some ideas for some basic improvements, but otherwise, overall a success.
Okay, good to hear.
And certainly, say when the boys program, it was a better fit for them to move back to Hingham Maritime
Right.
halfway through the season, and that was great.
That worked okay, too? Okay.
What's the plan for the fall?
The high school team will be in its entirety on the wharf.
Okay.
All right, so you'll keep in touch with Tom, and we'll figure out a time that makes sense to have you back
To
to
do the
continue
design
to
review.
talk about this, yeah.
Yeah.
And, like you said, I mean, maybe at that point, we've had we certainly, on Bill's timeline, will, consider his recommendations from tonight, as will the advisory committee, so we'll move forward on that. We'll continue to monitor the MWRA activity, with respect to the sewer for the wharf. So we'll have some updates, I would suppose, for you along this timeline as well.
So so we have some clarity on our fundraising strategies as we move forward, because certainly if we're aiming for a December 18 deadline, it's a different strategy than a December 19 deadline. Do we feel as though the alternate term would be triggered? Is that our sense at this point?
I don't see a path forward whereby both the sewer and the wharves are completed by December 31, 2018.
I'd like to take that as a little bit of a to-do. I don't disagree with you. The lease
There's no
is,
reason to do it now.
the lease is a little bit, the lease focuses on, in terms of triggering the automatic extension, the lease focuses on the sewer and wharf improvements. It doesn't really say anything about the fundraising.
Right.
But to your point, if we know it's going to be extended, then, should.
And it's not to say we're going to stop, we're going to wait a year and restart. It's just that our plan will be different.
Right, and so.
What we do tomorrow will be different than.
Right. But I'd like to, I guess, I'd prefer to have an opportunity to talk to Susan before we.
Yeah, I mean, it's June 19th, and I kind of feel like, while I understand logistically, it's very unlikely that the sewer improvements will happen. I kind of, with over 6 months to go, I kind of don't want to throw up my hands and say, oh, we're not going to hit this timing. And I appreciate that has implications for your fundraising strategy.
No, I agree with
But
that.
I would like to see kind of how the next 60 to 90 days go.
Yeah, so maybe we make all those, kind of come to all those decisions in the fall, and I'll also, or we'll also have the opportunity to talk to Susan, so we just understand the mechanics of the lease. But it struck me that it doesn't say anything about your the timing of your obligation, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to hold you to that obligation if we know in the fall that the period's going to be extended. You see what I mean?
Yep.
So perhaps we'll give Susan a call as well and just talk about the logistics, if any, that are needed to make sure everybody knows where they are.
We just approved a $500,000 transfer for legal fees, so let's work through Tom.
That's fine.
And the only thing I would point out on this issue is, my understanding in the lease is that if the town fulfills its obligations, then there is not an automatic
Right.
extension for
Right.
HMC to complete its fundraising.
Right.
So. that-
Yeah, it just was,
throw that out there.
yeah.
But
it
yeah,
just-
there's more to.
Yeah, okay, so the fall, right?
Yeah, I hope we can all continue to keep moving on it, because I do think that gaining some, kind of nailing down the conceptual plan is going to be really helpful for everybody to move forward with their respective pieces. So that's the other reason I'm a little bit reluctant to say, let's extend this by a year right now. I'd kind of like to keep the collective pressure on all of us to keep moving, because I think that's in all our best interest.
Well, I think a fall meeting is terrific to see what your thinking is and see where we are at
Yep.
as we as a board talk about the alternatives.
I think the other piece that this is triggering that may be helpful for us to understand, just thinking about the presentation we had from the Harbor Development Committee, is sort of, what some timing options might look like. And, you heard Bill talking about being ready for state funding and, understanding what those possibilities are and the timing, because I don't know if you could see it up there, but what the repair that they are recommending to Barnes Wharf is a $3.8 million investment by the town. So certainly if there's a way to get, some state funding to help out with that. But also even just understanding, how long it will take to do these wharfs. I don't
have any sense of that, yeah.
And we just want to make sure that we're all being realistic about the timeline, and that we are all for charging forward and getting this done, but to tell our donors and get our donors excited about it, knowing that really shovels in the ground is, for the building, is some time off, based on the wharf repair work.
Yep. Yep.
I think we need to be painting a picture that is exciting but realistic.
Yep, I agree with that. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming in. Yes?
So the only thing I had, which I've mentioned already, I think 3 times tonight in my town administrative report, was we received the Municipal Vulnerability Program grant in the amount of $19,500. But really, that was, I don't want to make light of it, because that was a terrific joint effort between our engineering staff and our community planning staff. And happy to see that, and good things happen when people work together. So, thank you.
Is that it? Our next meeting is,
July 10th.
okay.
Me?
Sure.
So my first thing was to say happy birthday to Bill Friend, which we already did. I think I know I was remiss in not congratulating the high school seniors at Hingham High for a fantastic graduation. I hope you're all having a busy and safe summer as you prepare for your next endeavors. Paul mentioned, and I mentioned as well, that we attended the dedication of the Eugene Creedon Park down at the shipyard, which is just a great event. His family was very touched by the honor. And it was wonderful hearing not only his story, but the story of the landing tanks built at the shipyard. Mary, Paul, and I were all at a wonderful Taste of Hingham and honored our own Olympian Alice Merriweather there. So phenomenal to see the merchants and so many families out enjoying the square. The Heritage Museum was open. It was really a beautiful day. And as Paul said tonight, the tour of Avalon reminded me of how hard Mary and Paul have worked to bring this town over the 10% affordable housing stock limit. And, there will be a percentage of affordable units at Avalon. It's a beautiful facility. And again, as Paul said, the other thing that I think I had never really experienced, particularly in a building project of that magnitude, was the involvement of our police, our fire, and our permitting boards. Joe Fisher was there from the ZBA. Our building inspectors will be and have been continually on site. It's important, really, really important to get that project right and safe. And so it was really nice to see all those folks in attendance as well.
And I would just add one thing. We've been talking a lot about the water, and I think it's worth noting, while it's not a town-sponsored event, that a number of Hingham residents and family members of Hingham employees are participating in the Newport to Bermuda sailing race. So a number of people, including Katie and John Burt and their 14-year-old son, Ethan, the Kylander family, a member of the Curtis family, they set off with a number of people on Friday from Newport, and they are still on the water, due to arrive in Bermuda tomorrow.
Wow.
And our congratulations for their fortitude. We are glad they are safe. We 635 nautical miles, and you have to come back. So that is just quite an endeavor. And I think it's noteworthy that a number of Hingham residents are participating. I'd also mention that Kate Richardson in our IT department, her husband Peter is on the crew of the Bert's Boat Lola. So a lot of Hingham connections out on the water in the Atlantic.
That's great.
You're in charge, right?
So make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Good night. We'll see everybody on July 10th.
All right.
July 10th.
Good night, everybody.